This is a monument to the heroes of Warsaw. It is called the Warsaw Nike, a symbol of victory over the Nazi occupation, a symbol of the rebirth of the city of Warsaw. Today, children play at the base of this statue, where but 21 years ago, death and total destruction filled the air. And all that has happened since has been under the shadow and the bitter memory of the war. In Warsaw today, the Palace of Culture, with the name of Joseph Stalin over the portal, is a heavy reminder of the post-war years when Poland was a Moscow-controlled Stalinist satellite. Then in October 1956, the Polish people brought an end to the Stalinist period and returned Władysław Gomulka from political imprisonment to high political power. The nation embarked upon the Polish road to socialism. Now, a decade later, in this Catholic country with a communist government, there is a new generation. A generation born under communism, but with no direct memory of the war or of the bitter past. A generation more interested in the good, the personal life, than in the conscious building of the socialist state.
In its Changing World series, the National Educational Television Network presents a documentary on Poland and Polish youth. Poland, communism's new look.
This song is a current bestseller in the city of Warsaw, which is not at all the drab capital of a communist nation that many Westerners seem to expect. Life on the Warsaw streets is very much like that in any other large European city. The old aristocratic social graces are very much in evidence.
Jeśli nie, to dlaczego chcesz zatrzymać prąd rzek, szum fal, twoje łzy, mój płacz? Żal nic tu nie pomoże, łzy twoje i mój płacz. Nikt nie uciszy morza, nie zatrzyma biegu fal.
This is the 21st year of Poland's post-war independence. Years of recovery from the destruction of the war, years of revolution and the emergence of new political forms. And for the first time, there is a generation that knows no other world than Poland under communism. This is the garden of a private home in the most fashionable section of Warsaw. The man is Mieczysław Rakowski, a member of the Central Committee of the Communist or United Workers' Party, and editor of the weekly newspaper Polityka, the leading political journal in Poland.
I think that everyone who tries to build a new society or who is involved in a revolutionary process, he thinks that he can do all, that all is possible. Then the next step is the practice. Very heavy, very difficult, you know.
Recovery from the war has been difficult and costly, and today there is a curious mixture of pride in what has been accomplished and frustration over the next step. The center of national pride is Warsaw itself, a city literally risen from ashes. The new construction includes even the faithful restoration of the old town section of the city. Today, life in Poland is described as being stabilized.
This society is, in a certain sense of the word, stabilized, and this is very nice that we are becoming more and more stabilized. But with it, this factor, the conditioning of all of our people, and especially of our young people, is also becoming different.
This is the philosopher and party theoretician, Professor Adam Schaff. The meaning of stabilization in Poland is complex. No one wants a return to the pre-1956 Stalinist era. This means that both the government and the people are careful not to disturb the status quo. The people do not press demands on the government, and the government in turn does not require great sacrifices from the people. The concentration is on economic welfare. But at the same time, there has been a tightening of restrictions against expressions critical of the Gomulka government. In 1964, there was a formal protest against censorship signed by this man, Antoni Slavinsky, and by 33 other Polish writers and intellectuals. The poet and translator Jerzy Sito describes how one form of censorship operates.
But I don't think there is an important book, written which isn't published. These things operate differently, really. It's not the official censorship, the building where people sit and read the things, which makes certain things impossible, for publication. It's the internal sort of censorship, which dictated by the situation, more or less, and taken into account by everybody individually, which very often forbids writing of things, which couldn't be published.
Another aspect of stabilization involves relations between the church and the state. Since 1956, there has been an accommodation between state, an accommodation that's for religious freedom and church silence on current political. Of Poland's 31 million people, over 90% are born Catholic. Religious instruction is available, and there is a national religious holiday in communist Poland, the Feast of Corpus Christi. Next year, Pope Paul is expected to visit Poland. Church attendance is high throughout the country, but it is also true that among the younger generation, there is a falling away from the church. This young man, Zbyszek Jołądziowski, is a graduate student of languages at the University of Warsaw.
I was born as a Catholic. That means I was baptized, and I had religion classes in my primary school. What do you call it? First school. But then, since I began to think about it, the more I thought, the more I was out of it. There's one thing I should like to say. I make a very distinct differentiation between two things. That means the church and the religion. I don't have so many objections as to the religion. All my objections are against the church. That means, this whole circus which is going on in the church. That's my personal opinion. As much as I know, this is quite a common feeling about it, especially among young people here.
Stefan Kisielewski, a member of the Sejm, the Polish Parliament, prominent Catholic writer and member of the editorial board of the Catholic newspaper The Popular Weekly, comments on the position of Catholics in a communist country.
I think that a Catholic has no difficulty in accepting a system of nationalized production or state production, of course within reasonable limits, within range of economic necessity. But the world outlook of communist or Marxist philosophy is impossible for a Catholic to accept. If this was a necessary condition, he could not consider himself a socialist. And also a political system in which one party makes the decisions and certain people in that party have absolute authority cannot be accepted by people who profess to a different outlook. I still think that coexistence of people of different ideologies within one country, even when ruled by communists, is possible because of patriotism, because of common love of the fatherland, when it is based on reasonable compromises.
But what kind of society, in terms of a basic standard of living, has the Polish experiment produced? In a city like Warsaw, one can read the general economic problems of the nation. The housing shortage is still acute. The new apartments are attractive, but tiny. And the pressure for housing is such that people literally are moved into new buildings before they are completed. The problem of an apartment is one of the most frequent topics of conversation.
And I've heard that they will be able to supply me with an apartment flat if I work for them. Warsaw is too hard to find a good flat.
If you want to stay in Warsaw, or if you get a job in Warsaw after you graduate, it is really difficult to get a flat. And that makes the situation that is one of the main problems when you begin normal life and you start working.
Housing is relatively inexpensive, but food is not. An average family spends between 50 and 60% of its income for food. This Warsaw supermarket is not radically different on the outside from many markets in the United States, except for the tiny and unpaved parking lot. Food prices are set by the state and are uniform throughout the country, but one will also find free enterprise among individual peasants selling vegetables on the street. By Western standards, the inexpensive items are housing, education, and medical care. But clothing, by the same standards, is relatively expensive. A man's suit can cost as much as 2/3 of a factory worker's monthly wage. Privately owned shops selling Western goods flourished. The open-air flea market, specializing in Western clothes and shoes, is always crowded. And the Podmostum, the used car market, is one of the most popular places on a Warsaw weekend. To buy a car through normal state channels may require as long as a year's wait, and its price may equal 2 to 3 years' salary for an average wage earner. At the same time, for the majority of Poles of peasant or worker origin, they have never had it so good. However, with the demands of a growing industrial population and the exodus of young men from the farms to the cities, a major crisis looms ahead in Polish agriculture. When asked about articles in Politica on agricultural policy, Editor Rakowski replied,
"This is our weakness, I must say, because the small farms are too small, and we must do something, but we don't know what we can do."
63% of the farms in Poland are less than 12.5 acres. Collectivization of agriculture along Soviet lines was never seriously attempted in Poland. And today, 90% of all farms are privately owned, and many peasants own farms in which the plots of land are separated from each other by a mile or more. This is a farm in the village of Kuropatnik in the Polish Western Territories. There have been attempts to form cooperatives in the villages, but as Rakowski observes,
we try to build these cooperative villages. Nothing, no result.
the Polish peasant is a strong-willed individual and is highly resistant to change. Government efforts to form large state farms have met with limited success, and the state farms account for only 10% of Polish agriculture. Obviously, there are no large landowners in the pre-war pattern, but the average Polish peasant is better off than the average industrial worker. In fact, due partially to a liberal state loan policy, they do very well.
Here on my house, I put a new roof. On the stable, I also laid new shingles. Also this year, I built a new toilet and rebuilt the barn. This shed is entirely built by me. For the barn itself, I paid 18,000 zloty this year. The roof on the stable cost 5,000, and here 4,000 on the farmhouse. This is a serious sum of money.
Frequently, the only mechanization on a Polish farm is the son's motorcycle. Given the relative affluence of the peasant, it is easy to understand why the Polish worker has an attitude described by Rakowski in this way.
The worker, the answer is why I must help the peasant. Why they live better than I? Again, not only economic problem, but also a political problem.
The Leszczynski family came from the former eastern section of Poland, which is now a part of the Soviet Union. They, along with several million others, were moved into what is called the Polish Western Territories, an area made up of former German provinces. And it is only within the past several years that they have come to believe that their new home is permanent, that it will not be returned to Germany. The Polish peasant can hardly be described as a dedicated communist. At the same time, the peasants are not against the Gomulka government. There is a kind of arrangement to the mutual benefit of both. The peasants own land and flourish, and they give at least tacit support to the government. And the government, in turn, is banking on the possibility that new opportunities, particularly in education, will erode away the traditional conservative patterns of life in the rural areas.
I came at the end of the war from prisoner of war camp in Germany. My wife was already here, and since then, I'm here. And the children, I'd like them to work not as hard as we, their parents, and we will see what will come out of it. If they will study, something will come out of it.
Do you think you will stay here on the farm?
Rather not. I want to study agricultural machinery. I have to study for 3 more years.
And later?
I want to work or study more. I'll see how I'll be doing at the technical school. I'd rather go to the city. I'll see. Maybe I'll find work which is connected with farming.
When do you plan to get married?
When I finish school.
The kings of life. This is a phrase used by many a city dweller to describe the Polish peasant. Under a picture of Gomulka, the first secretary of the United Workers' Party and the strong man of the Polish government, a band from the local sugar beet factory plays at a village dance organized by the ZMW, or Young Peasants Association. The action is heavy-footed and vigorous, and any dance style goes. And on a Sunday morning in the village of Kuropatnik in Catholic Poland, everybody goes to church. the persistence of the traditional modes of life, affected more by the weather than by politics, is nowhere more evident than in the peasant villages of Poland. In the ancient city of Krakow, which, unlike Warsaw, escaped destruction during the war, the noon trumpet is still sounded from the tower of St. Mary's Church. Today, however, the trumpeter is a member of the fire department. Home of the Jagiellonian University, one of the oldest in Europe, Krakow is also the site of a massive steel mill built during the Stalinist period in Poland, Huta Imlenina, the Lenin foundry. The early days of Nowa Huta, literally new foundry, were chaotic. The task of transforming unskilled and undisciplined peasants brought from all parts of Poland to work at building and operating the foundry was accompanied by all the turmoil and troubles of the rawest frontier town. The steel mill was built with Russian money, machinery, and technical supervision. Today, 15 years after the beginning of construction, this is the largest steel mill in Poland. And the town of Nowa Huta, which began as a kind of labor camp, now has more than 100,000 inhabitants. Janusz Włocki, who works at one of the open hearth furnaces, is representative of the new breed of young industrial worker in Poland. Raised in the factory town of Nowa Huta, he attended vocational school and began work at the foundry. After 2 years of army service, he returned to work and also began studies in metallurgy at the factory evening school. His shift begins at 6 a.m. and is over at 2.
Free time I have very little, an hour of it. I get home from work, change, have dinner, go to my lectures, and return home at 7, 8, or 9. I have lectures 5 days a week, and usually more, so that really my only free day is Sunday.
Nowa Huta operates on 3 shifts around the clock. Because of Poland's need for foreign currency, the products of Nowa Huta are not used domestically, but are exported. The primary buyers are the Eastern Communist countries, but some products, galvanized sheet iron in particular, are exported to the United States. The sign in this rolling mill exhorts the workers to remember fascism. The workers at Nowa Huta represent the country's future hopes for an industrialized Poland. But the shift from an agricultural to an industrial agricultural economy is not without its problems, as Rakowski notes.
We imported modern machines from England, but the man who's standing at this machine, yesterday he was still a peasant. And you have not only in this moment the economic problem, but also a political problem, social problem, a cultural problem.
Janusz and his young wife live in Nowa Huta with his wife's parents. He and his father-in-law, who also works at the foundry, commute by streetcar. It's about a 10-minute ride. His great dream is to have an apartment of his own.
The biggest problem for a young family is an apartment. My wife is working, and I'm also working, so we are saving money now. We had such a system that we could rent an apartment through the factory. But now it is a more difficult situation, and everybody is applying for a cooperative apartment. You can save 100 zloty a month, so that at the end of 4 years you have 4,800 zloty in your apartment saving book. I'm a member of this cooperative because then at the end of 4 years the state gives a grant of an additional 50% of the amount of savings. This applies as a down payment on an apartment, and I pay the balance for 20 to 25 years. The payments amount to 50 or 100 zloty a month more than the rent in state-owned apartments. If I had to choose, I would stay in my present circumstances. I have already my chosen work. Now I only need to study theory. Had I studied at the university, I would have had to look around and choose my work then.
The 3 p.m. dinner hour is customary throughout Poland. Equally customary are crowded living conditions. This is the largest room in a flat consisting of 2 rooms, plus a small kitchen and bathroom. 20 years ago, almost 70% of Poland's population lived in rural areas. Today, the population is almost equally divided between rural and urban areas. This family, whose new way of life is in sharp contrast with their peasant background, is illustrative of one of the major social and cultural changes going on in Poland today. The father, Franciszek Piepczyca, who has been a member of the Communist Party since 1948, explains why he left the farm for the foundry.
When under your window a great industry is being built, the promise of better pay and better life appears. In the Krakow district, the farms were so parceled out that you could not even count the parcels in acres. It is very difficult to support a family on a little plot.
What can I say? When the family was a big one, some stayed on the farm, and the rest spread out to look for work because they had no future. What could the rest do when there was not even enough land for one?
How is it that you have a religious picture being a party official?
I can answer that. What does a husband have to do with it? I'm a Catholic. I don't belong to the party. The picture is mine. My husband has his party, but here there is no party.
It does not disturb me at all. I have my own point of view. The picture is only a dead object which looks over the marriage.
It's not unusual for parents to have to provide room in their apartment when one of their children marries. When their daughter married, the smaller of the 2 rooms was turned over to Vladislava and her husband Janusz. It's here that Janusz studies, and if there was ever an incentive to good housekeeping, it can be found in the fact that when the bed is made up, there is little room for anything else. Like most Polish couples starting out in this way, they have no plans for having children, at least until they get their own apartment. This generally prevailing attitude is reflected in Poland's declining birth rate, which today is only a little more than half of what it was 15 years ago.
I work with a group of people who study like I do, and whom I also meet after work. And among them, I think that I'm average.
Life as lived by Janusz, his wife, and their friends can be described as a life of careful, responsible conformity. There are many detour signs on the Polish road to socialism. With respect to the peasants, the government's policy has been a cautious one designed not to kindle resistance. Hence, the problem of small farms which are not adaptable to mechanized farming methods remains. In turn, the urban population is beginning to demand a greater share of the economic wealth of the country. But the rate of industrial development has slackened in recent years, and it is an economic fact of life that when industrial development in a credit-poor country is forced ahead, somebody has to pay. The main area of national life in which the Polish government is not holding primarily to the status quo is in education. No one need be reminded that education is a primary means of effecting a gradual social change. and the Gomulka government has placed a high priority on continuing the development of Poland's educational system. All education, including the universities and polytechnical institutes, is free, and scholarships to cover living expenses are easily obtainable from a variety of state sources. An intentionally discriminatory admissions policy favors the children of peasants and workers. This is a recently completed dormitory for young men attending Warsaw Polytechnic. It's called the Riviera. The state investment in education in Poland is very heavy. Through the state-supported Polish Students Association, cultural activities, student clubs, travel, and vacations are available to students at minimal cost. This vast complex of services touches practically every aspect of a student's life. Information of events outside Poland is readily available to students, as Julian Bistionowski, head of tourism for the Warsaw University section of the Polish Students Association, observes.
We can get a lot of information. We can buy Western, American, English, French magazine, newspapers here in Poland. There's quite a lot of publications, and at least part of them are really objective and good. And then you have a lot of contacts with foreign students coming here. So I don't think there's a lack of information a problem here.
The Polish student is very career-minded, a fact which at times makes him appear different from the more politically active students of the period immediately after the war. However, Julian Bistionowski argues,
I don't think that the people, that's the young people now and the young people 15, 20 years ago are different. Different are conditions. And certainly when we had war, or we had first years after the war, this rebuilding, still fighting against the reactionary background, underground and so on, that involved some other feelings of these young people of that time than ours. And certainly in the normal situation we are now, more stabilized, just normal peaceful conditions.
However, if you're the son or daughter of a government official or a highly placed professional, stabilization can take on a very special meaning, as it has for these two young and privileged people.
Poland.
It does depend upon money.
Well, it doesn't depend upon money, yes, of course, but it
But
depends.
money is connected with it. Yeah,
but it depends on the position, just not connected with money.
it depends of position by which we mean possibilities
Yeah.
of ours. I mean that all of us, we can afford our winter holidays in Zakopane, which is very expensive.
And the summer holiday in Zapat, which is
Yeah.
as well expensive.
And summer holidays in Zakopane, which is also very expensive.
Yeah.
And skiing and skating and driving cars and have some nice trips out of Warsaw for weekends, fishing, hunting, riding.
We've got much easier to studying and we are living in much easier times, I would say, than during the war.
But still, from the psychological point of view, there are some cases in which a boy or girl from our generation tells to his or her father, you were a hero.
Yeah, and
It was
and what
much
am I?
easier for you. And what am I? What I am to do?
Yeah.
I only have a job.
But a job and the material advantages that go with it are precisely what most university students and other Poles of the generation now coming into maturity want. Recently, this obvious interest in the personal life and a career has brought forth some criticism both inside and outside of Poland. Criticism to the effect that Polish youth are becoming disinterested in anything other than the personal life. However, Professor Schaff does not agree with this criticism.
There is a sort of mythology concerning the young generation, not only in my country, but everywhere. People answer these questions normally in such a way the young people are not engaged, they are not ideological, they are pragmatic, they are realistic in a certain understanding of this world, and I don't agree with it. It is not true at all.
However, the poet Jerzy Sito observes,
the important thing is, and I think it's the thing that matters greatly to Poland at the moment, that the radicalism, the natural radicalism of the young people was channeled. And the really important thing about radicalism is that it can only survive if it's left free, more or less. If these people are left to choose their own devices, their own aims and their own spheres of activity. Now that thing was certainly denied to these people. It's institutionalized, it's channeled, people are trying to make it into a useful social force, that natural tendency existing in every young human being. And of course it doesn't help the situation. On the contrary, it liberates that mocking, sort of ironical, cynical attitude, and deprived of these possibilities on the surface, they are trying, of course, to substitute it with things real, things material, things we were talking about, you know, the motor car, easy go, lucky, you know, sort of life.
I have so many activities, you know, that means, you know, studying, working. Then again I have my jazz activity, which takes quite a lot of time. I'm just trying to live my life in a best possible way. That means, what is the best possible way now again? I don't know. I never really thought about it very much. I think that, you know, personal career is one of the most important things, which doesn't really mean only in financial terms, mind you. This is also, you know, the self-satisfaction that you get out of it. Just, you know, kind of work that makes you feel happy. And at the same time, you can earn your money on it to make your living.
Zbigniew Cebulski is a Polish film actor of international fame.
Well, a man who is not searching is a dead man. The most beautiful feature of a man, I believe, is searching. A man is seeking himself. The search is a function of the truth. One must search.
The dark glasses are Cebulski's trademark. He is perhaps best known for his role in the prize-winning film Ashes and Diamonds. This is a scene from one of several Polish feature films currently in production.
One cannot judge young people watching them dance the surf and the twist. True, these are only external manifestations. One has to search inside them, in those moments when they open themselves. In Poland, there is a strong movement of these student theaters, which, for me, in a sense, are stages of thought.
This is an excerpt from a mime performance by the Wrocław Student Mime Theater. The story, which evokes memories of the war as well as being a commentary about one aspect of the nature of man, involves a group of children who see a man executed and who then proceed in imitation to hang the weakest member of their own group. However, at Giżycko on the Mazurian Lakes, at a camp run by the Polish Students Association, a very different subject matter was being explored.
One works to live. To live, one needs money. And an additional matter is the development of your personality. I don't think that one can help being interested in it, but about this, one does not talk, because it is an internal problem.
Everybody has his own personal plans.
I simply want some kind of satisfaction from what I'm doing. But what can I say? For the scientific career, the material career simply improves. But remember that a doctor earns more than an MA.
But a doctor's degree takes 10 years, and you get an 1800 zloty scholarship, 2,000 at most. So now the most important thing is work, and finding an apartment, somehow to get settled.
When a student marries young, this may terminate his studies. Sometimes you marry without thinking, and then you must stop. We marry later because we're more liberal about relations, and early marriage is not necessary.
If the life is good, and we can live just as it is, well, I don't know.
Life is good.
Ideal. The most important thing is for the parents to try to understand us, which means if the parents would be interested in our problems, if they would try to live our life, then the relations between us would be very good.
There is no conflict between two generations, but a conflict between two ideologies. That means we don't quarrel with our parents. We understand that they're right in their own way. But we have our own life, and we can't always follow our parents' advice. They can't understand that we sometimes understand much better than they do. The obsession with worries is infectious. We should remember the lessons of war, but we don't want to think only about the past.
Absolutely not. We don't believe in war.
Why do we have to relate to bad life, to those circumstances which our elders tell us about?
At the same time, there is in every Pole a kind of genetic memory of the war.
The war, so, you know, in Poland where each family lost at least one person, sometimes more, during the war, we were educated in the atmosphere still, well, among people still remembering very well. And we are feeling that very strongly, the question what the war means. So we really feel it, that the only and the most important condition for normal life, for normal development, cultural, economical, any other, for normal personal happiness or something, is the peace.
A thing like Auschwitz should never be forgotten, and more often you come here, you see more, and the more you understand. You could hardly find a family in Poland which hadn't lost at least one member of the family in Auschwitz. And I think every Polish family could find its grave here in Auschwitz, and that's what makes us feel so strongly about it.
There are those who may not know that Auschwitz is the Nazi concentration camp where 4 million people met death by starvation, beating as victims of medical experiments, by hanging, by firing squad, and in mass execution by poison gas. And there are those who have forgotten this museum of man's inhumanity to man. The fear of a revitalized West Germany amounts to almost a national phobia in Poland. This Warsaw engineering student was asked if he felt more threatened by the United States than by Germany.
I'm astounded. You know, I don't understand why I should be afraid of the United States. We have never waged any war with the United States.
So we shouldn't be afraid, I think. You know, there are some political, you know, differences between our system and yours, but I don't think it's, you know, it should be the war between our countries.
Although there is public criticism of the United States' action in Vietnam within Poland, there is also a deeply ingrained belief that open relations with the West are possible and, in fact, necessary. Stefan Kisielewski observes,
I have often said that Poland is a kind of bridge between East and West, between capitalist and socialist countries, between materialism and spiritualism, and that this Polish experiment may produce interesting results.
Also during the Cold War, the relations between Poland and some Western countries are much more, are greater than in another case, you know. And therefore, for instance, look, now you find some information about the economic relations between Romanian, for instance, and Western Germany or United States and so on. But we are the first in Poland which we try to find agreement with Krupp, not another socialist country, you know. So I must say that maybe it looks sometimes that Poland is now one of the latest, one of the nearest position or something. But true, really. Our connections, our relations with Western are rather great, and we develop these connections, you know. Maybe we aren't so modern as the people want, some people. But important is that we go on the same line or the same way in which we thought, about which we thought in '56.
October 1956 is the magic date on the Polish calendar, not only because it brought an end to the Stalinist period, but also because it promised a general opening up of criticism of government policy and the opportunity to re-examine Marxism in practice.
Poland was first that changed the situation. It was an important change in our political life, in cultural life as well, and economical as well, and economical too. But well, it would be really too difficult to just say in a few words. Well, I think we became more free. We got more contacts with the Western, with the world culture, and we got more involved into international policy. And as a result, as students, we get more interested in these things.
The intellectual leader of the 1956 revolt against Stalinism was philosophy professor Leszek Kolakowski of the University of Warsaw. His articles, which fired the imagination of the students, were published in the magazine Po prostu.
Po prostu was a student paper, which was, I think, organized in '50s. And then before the '56, before the October, they are on the first line in a fight against Stalinism. And after '56, began the trouble with this paper in this way that the staff from Po prostu, as I understand, was against the general directions which are coming from Central Committee, especially from Gomułka.
It was extremely interesting. It was the first, after a long period of absolute deadliness in Polish press, the first paper which you can take, read, and become intellectually stimulated by the contents of the paper. It certainly voiced the discontent of the society at that particular moment, and it certainly showed that all those elements within the society which thought that the change is inevitable, and that if it's directed in the proper way, it can save as much of the so-called Polish road to socialism from the total disaster, calamity which occurred at that particular time, without trying to overboard everything that was important and valid.
But Poprostu was closed down by government order in 1957. The critical question today is whether or not the key idea of the Polish October is still alive. The idea expressed by Kolakowski.
Refusal to be directed in our own decisions is the refusal to recognize any authority, any ideological dogma as something untouchable.
The sociologist Jan Sielecki comments on the ideas of today's youth.
They don't believe that the world may be perfect, and that they don't believe that there is in the whole world, and in Poland too, a political organization which can make things perfect. They are against a big ideology controlling the whole life.
And from a different point of view, Adam Schaff explains,
they look forward for a better future, for better conditions of living, for, let us say, becoming in this or that sense richer and so on.
I read papers and I know what's going on in the world, in the political world, as I think everybody does. But I don't particularly care for it. I mean, you know, I'm not a member of any political organization, if that's what you want. There are people who are responsible for politics, so let them you know, worry about it.
But there is also a quite different attitude among many young Poles today.
The students in Poland generally know what they want. They know. And they realize that their future is to work. Is to work for the country.
This young man, Karol Skornik, is being trained as a nuclear engineer. Eventually, he will be in charge of a nuclear power station in Poland. And Krzysztof Burchardt is a computer specialist and student of automatic control at the University of Warsaw.
Try to use control computers in Nowa Huta.
Karol and Krzysztof are examples of an emerging new elite in Poland. They are well trained, and their approach to life is more scientific than political. They are inclined less to romantic gestures than to careful step-by-step planning of economic and political changes within Poland. And a man like Rakowski, a member of the establishment, but with a keen understanding of youth, is aware of the changes to come.
In Poland now is a tendency to just to have a status quo. But I don't think that just in the same moment the people are against any changes. And I can't say that this is a type of conservatism. But rather the people want to change the situation, the people and the political forces in our country, from step by step. Just with such a process, to be careful, because all costs. I think that we have a lot of this dynamic energy among the people, especially among the young generation. But there are, of course, more technicians and politicians. But it is good for us, because this is our future.
At the moment, Poland has reached its first plateau. The old ideological battles are over, but there is an uneasy truce between the cautious hold-the-line attitude of the socialist old guard and the growing demands of those whose view of life is not shaped and limited by the experience of the war. The young Poles of today are well-educated and tough-minded, and barring a radical upheaval within the communist world, they will inevitably move into positions of power. When they do, their decisions, economic and political, will tend to be made on a more open, efficient, and far less dogmatic basis than the socialist old guard. This can mean only an acceleration of change within Poland. It may also provide a more realistic and less ideological basis for relations with the West, relations based on mutual interest and the recognition of Poland's unique value as a bridge between East and West. A realistic and flexible U.S. policy will be required to encourage and to take advantage of the coming new look in Polish communism.